Um, Finally, before I give the floor to Professor Hofstede, my namesake, I would like to take you through how the adventure of this wonderful event all began. Well, it actually started in my bathroom. And don't worry, I won't reveal all the details, but on this very warm and sunny Monday morning, it was Monday the 27th of June, I was just brushing my teeth. And I just received the overview of the students that we would be welcoming in the next edition of our elective of international relations. And I just started thinking about what to answer this year to the question whether I was the real Hofstede, whether I was a relative of, etc. But I had already experienced that answering that I am the real Hofstede wasn't always so satisfactory for my students, strangely enough. When the buzzer of the toothbrush went off, I just decided to take the plunge and send an email to Gert-Jan, in which I briefly explained my very, very difficult and sad situation, and asked him if he might be willing to come over to Windesheim and give a guest lecture for our international relations students. He accepted within an hour, and so it happened. That's what brought us here today. And it's not only with the international relations students, but students and teachers from many different programs and from 10 different countries. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Professor Gert-Jan Hofstede.
Thank you, Mr. Hofstede. And how good to be here. I love that it's open, so you don't necessarily need a roof over and walls around an auditorium. This is new for me. Right, Operation Market Garden took place 78 years ago in 1944. I wasn't there at the time. This was an attempt by the Allied forces to end the Second World War by, among others, dropping parachutists near Arnhem. And I live very close to there. So this is one of these old airplanes. They fly every year around mid-September to repeat parachute droppings. Now with only a few very, very ancient soldiers and some younger people. 78 years ago. If you go 70 years in the other direction, you land in the year 2100, right? 2100. You might still be there, some of you. Will the trees still be sort of part brown, part green in Ede in my garden at that time, by mid-September? Maybe not. Maybe they'll all be dry due to changed summer weather. So a lot has happened in the last 78 years because actually Operation Market Garden failed, and then we had the hunger winter in the Netherlands, which killed many people. And my mother was a teenage girl at the time, and her father was a vet. So they lived in a rather large house, and a German officer was stationed in their house during the war. And she remembered as a teenage girl that her father would ask the officer in the living room, because he was a bit desolate in his little room with his bube, and they were being asked in the living room, and then the man would start to complain about the Scheißkrieg. Denn hat ja ein Hotelrestaurant und das ging natürlich alles kaputt. He was very sad about the war, but he was not going to desert or anything like that. It was very dangerous. So you see, even something like this war has many different phases. Okay, I believe that now, in order for us to be in a different position after 78 years, we need another Operation Market Garden, but with this little arrow. And I'll talk about that for the next few hours. First, let's diagnose ourselves without too much mercy. We do very stupid things. I was here in Birkenau. This is one of the concentration camps from the Second World War. And it was kind of an industrial facility. These rails brought in truckloads of people who were then supposedly taken to the washroom, but really it was the gas chamber. And I've seen the heaps of stuff that they had to, because they had to strip naked, that they had to leave. It's horrendous. It's very hard to understand. But today, similar things are happening. And beyond that, We don't seem to get our act together about stopping the destruction of the world's climate and biodiversity. And you guys, you're young, you should be part of the solution. But your ancestors, such as myself, have not been able to do that. We need to change that. So how can we be less stupid about things? Let's first try to understand ourselves. And the first message I have is about, if you remember, the ant and the colony. So what do we see here? Ants, right? These are ants. Mieren. But what are they doing? What are they up to? Who can shout something to me about what these ants are doing? Holding each other. Okay, that could be the case. They seem to be holding each other. Let's see what happens if we add a bit of context. Actually, these are all my pictures. I was in Laos and I came across this nest in front of my eyes. They are actually holding together the leaves of their nest, right? Now you can see that. When you zoom in, you cannot really make sense of the behavior of these ants, although you did a good attempt, because they are holding on to the leaves. So it's very close. They have to organize that pretty cleverly. When an ant is tired, it will have to be changed, replaced by another one. And inside that nest are the queen, the eggs, everything that's valuable to the colony. So you have to zoom out in order to make sense of things. And this is what we'll do today. Try to zoom out to our human social behavior in order to understand why, although we understand what we're doing wrong, we cannot stop doing it. I have another example of you of these two levels of the individual and the system. Here we see a green meadow, and don't worry about the computer code. Some of you might like to see this program for real. It's one of the library programs in NetLogo that you can download for free, and it's called the Paths model. So here we have one individual walking around in a rather aimless way from one random place in the field to another, and leaving a little bit of a trace behind it. But that trace quickly disappears as the grass redresses itself and the memory of what the individual did is lost. Now let's see what happens if we put 25 of these same stupid, memoryless agents, individuals if you like, and let them wander around. They reinforce one another's behavior. So maybe if many of them pass in the same spots, the grass will be gone and you will have a bit of a path. You see, it hardly happens here. So it's still rather a chaotic bunch of idiots. But now we give them a purpose. We give them some buildings to walk through. They only go from building to building. And very soon you see that because now they walk the same path, they actually create straight paths, a sort of Roman roads, really. The Romans in Europe, in France and Spain and Italy, they made these straight roads because they were lords and they didn't have to take any deviations for anybody. Here you see a bit of that happening, although there's also some life. If I remove the buildings, the roads will also be lost pretty quickly. What happens if I now put 10 times as many? You see that from 1 to 10, we added some memory to the system, not to the individuals. They're still as stupid. Let's make them run. So here you see that very quickly, because there are so many of them, it's a bit like the dunes in the Netherlands, you know, where many tourists walk. They will make these kind of paths. So you have all these paths, and once there is a path, these individuals prefer to walk on the path than to take the grass. So they follow in one another's footsteps because of that reason. If I add the buildings again, you see that most of the paths remain. Some are also added. So here there's a lot of memory in the system. The system is literally path dependent on its own history. And this is a very good metaphor for society. Even if we want to change, it's hard to do, because it's easier to take a path that is already there than to create a new one. Who's going to be the first on the new path? Although this is a very simple model, really ridiculously simple, it gives an important message about path dependency and self-organization. All the agents are stupid, have no memory, but the system can learn and have a memory. This is both very good and very difficult if you want to change things. In practice, you also see this happen. For instance, those elephants there, once they passed over a certain place, that will be a path. And actually, they're now following an existing path. Other animals will then also use those paths, just like elephants might use human roads if it's more practicable for them. The bottom left, you see Wageningen campus. Actually, we used to have a logo that was a bit like this, but now we changed. It has so-called elephant paths, but really these were designed top-down. If they had first let the students walk the new campus, you would have had different paths. Bottom right, or right-hand side, I should say, you have a passage between two roads in Wageningen where the municipality thought they'd make a few poles so that cars could not pass, and they would accommodate the bicycles a bit. But you see that the bicyclists actually had a need for 2 lanes, so they created their own lane. So you see that there is, in real life, a sort of a dance between institutions and authorities trying to establish things top-down, and behavior of people making their own elephant paths or goats paths. On the right, this was in Kista in Sweden, you see that when the people cut the corner, the municipality actually also put stones there in order to accommodate those people. So it's a very democratic government there trying to accommodate the people, but of course the people do not even keep that road and kept cutting the corner further. Which in Sweden is worse than in the Netherlands because the grass grows slower. In Iceland, if you walk across a lawn somewhere, only a few people have to walk before the grass is destroyed. So what does this teach us? And I will have these takeaway messages every now and then. You're looking at Stonehenge here. It teaches us that the behavior of ants can only be understood if you know the colony. The behavior of people can only be understood if you know the behavior of society. So educating children as loose individuals is not a good idea. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a community to make a child thrive. And actually the best way for young people to thrive is have somebody to help and care for. This is why we have so many pets. It makes us feel better. It's not being loved, but it's actually contributing and loving that helps the best. But the message here is mainly the colony is not governed. It self-organizes. Even if you think there is a boss, probably that boss is not doing the actual organizing, or not a lot of it. So there is a kind of dance between the level of the individuals and the level of the system. And the history of the system is then the memory of the system, although the history of people typically tends to be rewritten for current purposes. Most of what you learn in history in most places in the world is not what actually happened. It's a selection made for the interest of the people who live now. So this Cristiano Castelfranchi, he is an Italian psychologist and philosopher, puts it as, we do not intend the consequences of our actions. We do not intend the collective consequences of our individual actions. Together we mess up the climate. Nobody wants to do it, but it still happens. Okay, any questions so far about the first bit? Or any questions in the live stream? I can't see so very well, but not yet. Any questions? Sorry?
Crystal clear.
Crystal clear. That means we go on. And here we have the chapter slide again. Now let me talk about sociality. You may have seen that my appointment at Wageningen University is artificial sociality. Now what does that mean? It means I create models, computer models, sometimes using NetLogo, of which you saw an example in this paths model, about what makes us humans tick, about our deep drives, adding them to models of management or policy and things like that. Because many of the attempts we make at organizing ourselves disregard our human nature. For instance, pretending that everybody is always economically rational. But that is not so. We don't live for that. Okay, so sociality. What do you live for, actually? You don't have to tell me, but think about it for a little while. What really matters to you? And is that the same thing that you make appear in your social media accounts, for instance? Are you presenting yourself in a different light than what you really think you are in those social media accounts? Could it be that when you're with different people, you seem to be living for different purposes and different things? Can you feel yourself being torn apart a little bit sometimes? And these are difficult questions, but they're important because the people who matter to you will sort of whisper in the back of your mind, even without you knowing it, and help you decide whether to go into business or medicine or agriculture or hospitality or care, for instance. Here is a nice piece of research about life goals of business people according to young people, just as most of yourselves. So these were MBA students in this case, 5 countries. The study was about more countries, but I selected 5 here. And I'll explain this to you a bit. So these MBA students had to say, what do you think a business leader in your country lives for? And they were able to choose among 15 things, and I'll mention them: growth of the company, continuity of the company, this year's profits, personal wealth, power, honor, creating something new, profits in 10 years, staying within the law, responsibility towards my employees, ethical norms, responsibility towards society as a whole, game spirit, patriotism, or the interests of my family. And for instance, Brazilian MBAs said that leaders in their country were primarily interested in game spirit. Number 2, power. Number 3, this year's profits. Number 4, continuity. And number 5, family interests. But if you go to China, number 1 was ethical norms, presumably Confucianist norms. Number 2, patriotism. 3, power. 4, honor. 5, responsibility towards society. Yeah. India, 1, continuity, long term. 2, patriotism. 3, power. 4, growth. 5, 10-year profits. A very business-like set of values here. Germany, responsibility towards society and responsibility towards employees. Also das ist sehr verschieden. Das ist sehr unterschiedlich. Nicht das Gleiche. Responsibility. Where are we as the Dutch? Some of us are probably Dutch. Is it close to the Germans, or maybe a bit more business-like? How about the USA? First, growth. Second, ethical norms. 3, personal wealth. 4, this year's profit. And 5, power. So you see, if all people equally want to do the right thing, they want to be good people, they will do different things. Because the value sets and the aims in life are not the same. And you can think about where you stand or where else you might stand, not in this list. So let's go back to you. I presume that probably when I asked you what do you live for, you had thoughts about making a contribution to something. And also thoughts about being loved and loving. I mean, all the songs in the world are about these things, aren't they? And it's not because it's not important, it's because it's essential. You want to love and you want to be loved. Actually, education and growing up is about learning how to do these things. You want to be significant and successful. And this is maybe what you concentrate on social media. I mean, if you get a like, somebody makes you more successful. If you give a like, you are making somebody more successful. So this is an exchange of significance, if you like. In short, in jargon, I'm going to say more about this jargon later, you want to be worthy of status. If you cannot be worthy of status, if nobody loves you, nobody appreciates you, then you might still try to acquire power. So you can force people to bend in front of you or something like that. And if that fails, you're in big trouble. And other people might be in trouble too, because you might want to take revenge on them. Come to that after 5 o'clock. Now there's this professor, Theodore Kemper, actually from St. John's University in New York, but he's now very old, older than Richard Lewis. I think he must be 95, nearing 96. I haven't heard from him in the last year. But he has a theory that I think should have been just as important as my dad's work about what drives human beings, and it's called status power theory of relations. It's been used a lot when he first came along with it in the 70s and 80s, especially with young people who were in trouble. But sociologists of the time thought it was too outrageous because he made links between the physiological, the psychological, and the sociological. He was connecting all these things. Anyway, I think he's brilliant. And here you see a Venn diagram of sets of words about status on the left-hand side and power on the right-hand side. So status is everything nice that we do to one another, or everything that we do in order to want to appear more successful without actually hurting another. For instance, showing off is trying to appear worthy of status. I'm showing off right now. And listening to is conferring status. So if you listen to me, you're also giving status to me. Some of you might be sending pictures of me to your friends to show how important you are now listening to me, and so on and so forth. So it's all about status. On the right-hand side, you see what happens when status is not forthcoming. When somebody's not giving you what you want. You're a boy, you like a girl, she doesn't want anything to do with her. Maybe you get her drunk and you rape her. That's power use. Okay? Don't do it. All these things on the right-hand side, typically we probably don't like them too much, but we do some of them, don't we? In the middle, it becomes ambiguous. This could be about status and it could be about power, like love. It starts as wanting to love. I will always love you, things like that. But at some point, the loved person isn't coming back with enough status, and then you get trouble. Every relationship, every romantic relationship goes to stages like that. So the real world of status and power has a lot of ambiguity. Why am I showing you this? To show that almost every word about relations is in a way about status and power. So what Kemper means by status is not this. It's this, okay? You can give and you can receive. So I have all these little grandchildren, 7 of them, and it's really cool to see how they are very eager to be given status and very quick to be jealous, and they don't disguise it as grown-ups do, so you can very clearly see it. Of course, they can also use power, make tantrums, beat up one another, and they have to learn from their parents, from everybody around them, when they can actually use power and when they shouldn't, and what is a successful way of behavior and what is not. That's also how gender identities get formed. It takes a village to raise a child. Okay, here is a bit of jargon about this theory and some references, and if you like this, the recent book, in the 2017 book, is a quick read that is comprehensive. About that. Older books are even better, I think, but okay, they're thicker. So to behave or to be worthy, For Kemper, it would be deserving of status. We all want to be deserving of status in the eyes of people who matter to us, who we think are worthy of status. If you think I'm a really good teacher, you might want to come to me and be in a picture with me or so. If you think I'm crap, you don't worry about that. To be loved and admired is to receive status. To belong or be significant is to be in a group in which you are well seen. And this starts to sound a bit like Maslow and the elementary needs of humans, because it is. To admire is to confer status. Actually, in English, to pay attention. To show off, to brag, or to joke is to claim status. And then if it goes wrong, you might fight or coerce people or deceive people, lie to them. And that's power use. Status power world in groups. Kemper uses the word reference group, and the reference means it doesn't need to be a real group, but it's something that drives your behavior. For instance, you might worry about somebody you haven't even met, or it might be that your parents are long dead and gone, but you still really would like to make them proud of you. So a reference group can be anything that sort of whispers in the back of your mind about what is good or not to do. They shape your morality. And here you see 3 of my grandchildren. 2 are siblings and 1 is a cousin. They're so happy to see one another. All they want is to be visiting one another. And of course, if grandpa is also there, that is even better. So I was shaking them in a hammock here. So those reference groups can be anything. It could be peers, lovers, books, teachers, heroes, God or deities. All of these are voices, and all of these are also real as voices. So the question, does something exist, is not as important as does it influence our social behavior? That's the more important question. The nice thing is that once we grow up, maybe some of you are, for instance, coaches or trainers to younger children. You are going to be a very, very important role model for them. So first, this may make you feel like you're a slave to all these other people. Who am I if everybody's influencing me? Well, you also do the same to those who come after you and to your fellow students. So you're not as powerless as you might think. You're also a reference group to others. And probably more so than you think. It's typical when you're young to, for a time, believe that you're insignificant and then find out, no, there are actually people who care about you, who think you matter. So we get to the second takeaway here. As social beings, we were made by our reference groups. It takes a village to raise a child. So, and what Kemper says is, whenever we need to decide about something, maybe give to charity, declare our love to somebody. The reference groups have a meeting in our minds about whether this is a good plan. Like the person we love could be of the wrong ethnicity or religion. Our parents might be against this, or a community, but we love her very much. What do? Things like that happen. We have no control over receiving and giving status and perceiving. So if somebody is really beautiful or admirable, we cannot control that. We can dissimulate our feelings, and maybe there are reference groups that forbid us from showing them. But the feelings are involuntary, and this is essential to our sociality. And the status that we have in society is a result of all these conferrals. You know how some people might have a formally very high status, but everybody knows they don't really deserve it. And that status will be eroding up to a point when they are somehow gotten rid of or become insignificant. And the way in which these processes go, the climbing up and going down, differ in different societies. But they always involve lots of little feedbacks from lots of people all the time. And then some formal acts as well. If you can use power, like starting a nasty, untrue gossip about somebody, then that can help you for a time, but you pay the price one day. And I actually think that Donald Trump is paying the price now for all the deceiving that he's done in the years of his presidency. I think even though many people still follow him for being such a strong man, also many other people don't follow him anymore, even though Biden is a much weaker man, and being strong is good in the USA, because he used so much power. Okay. Questions? I think probably in the back they will have to enable you to speak, give you the power to reach everybody.
It's not on. Oh, sorry. Do you reckon then that the more status a person has over you, that the more their opinions and their beliefs, etc., affect you as well? For example, a very close family member who you love dearly will have more affection over than a good teacher, for example?
That depends, of course, which family member and which teacher, but yes. And it also means that suppose that family member, now at one point you need that family member and tells you off or is busy with something else, you will have very strong emotions about that because you have a strong need for that family member as a reference group to help you.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Just go back.
Yeah. More questions? Ooh, let me see. Oh, it's at the back. Sorry, this is the first trial.
Yeah. You say that people make or have responsibility as a society in how people turn out, right? Then how would you explain people who have or had a very loving childhood to still turn out and really want the power and force it upon people?
It's difficult to talk about in very generic terms without knowing about whom you speak.
Yeah, for example.
But of course, our temperaments differ. And everybody has a degree of propensity to be concerned with their own status and claiming status. Some people are just much more like that than others. Actually, those people are mainly boys. And it also tends to be the case that other people like a braggart. Boys who claim a lot of status, especially if they also have young and status-worthy bodies, tend to receive a lot of status and maybe even reproduce their genes. So it is one of the things that is in our sociality is this propensity. It's not the only thing, and it would be also possible that the seeming happy youth wasn't so happy in reality. Right? Like Trump, I just mentioned him, he had a miserable youth. So if you look more closely into a story, maybe it becomes clearer.
Okay, thank you.
One third question, maybe. You can throw it to somebody else. Anybody else?
There is a question from the online audience, if that's okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
never mind.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, I'm just passing somebody now. It says China and the US score very high on ethical norms. But what kind of norms are these? And are they actually similar?
Very good question. No, they're not. So there is no judgment about what norms they are. I'll just show this graph again. So in China, ethical norms is the first of the concerns, and in USA the second. No, in China these would be Confucian norms, and they are strong on complementarity of roles. So you take on older brother, younger brother role, for instance, knowing who is where in vertical terms, very strongly. In the USA, it's very much about being a good team member and actually not putting yourself above somebody else. Fair play, for instance, is a word about in the US. So norms differ by society. Here, the interesting thing is that none of these 5 countries sets much store by the law. They don't like the law. The law means power moves on you. Nobody likes that so much.
I have another question, Gert-Jan.
Okay.
We have a question from St. John's University, New York, Basilio Montero. Are social relations understood in the same way in high context and low context cultures?
So I'll come to that later, but the message is the status power elements and the relation and the reference groups hold for everybody, just like we all have, if we are in good health, 2 legs and 2 arms. But it doesn't mean that we all of us have the same legs and arms of equal length and capacity. Right? So there are differences. I'll come to that later. So my purpose in coming up with this theory of Kemper is precisely to achieve comparability between the cultures of the world in terms that only looking at the differences, the cultural differences through my father's works lens does not allow. And I need to do that because if I want to make models, I have to have synthetic humans. I have to create those humans in computer code. So I need to make them human before I can give them cultural differences. And those human drives, they are in the Kemper's theory. So culture is just the ripples on the ocean of human sociality. Okay, let's go on. Okay, this actually, is that right? Yes. So I think we have time for your question. You had a question, right? Okay. Yeah. Oops. Very well done.
I don't know how to really frame it, but what you said is that you giving and taking, like with couples and all that stuff. So what's the reason behind that people usually search for someone who's like the same level of power? Is it because you're afraid that you can't give can't give them something? Because you, like, let's say someone is a politician, you have like a lot of power. Also, like a woman, like, I don't know, prime minister.
Or maybe a film star. They don't have power, but they have a lot of status.
Yeah, and the other one is just like, I don't know, like normal worker. Is that those relationships are like, I don't know, more difficult for people? Because like so the second part
they're
feels...
more difficult. We love to see films about them just because they are difficult. And we want to see how it could work. But you can easily imagine that if you are a pair, that we're talking here about an individualistic society, you're a pair of people, and one lives in much higher spheres than the other, this could lead to difficulties. I don't know about your classical education, but Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen, you have Darcy, who lives in high spheres, and you have Lizzie, who lives in rather impoverished spheres. And Darcy prevents his friend to marry Lizzie's sister, and actually praises himself for doing that, because he is from decidedly such a better level of society. So this is about status power standing unspecified. Of course, in daily life, we don't speak about status power in those terms. But yes, if you have a different status power standing, it becomes more difficult to relate if you are in an egalitarian society where men and women are supposed to be of more or less equal standing, but also in a collectivistic society, because the family then needs to approve of the choice, and will they approve of a choice of a lower choice. So there is endless complexity. It's a little bit like learning the rules of chess or Go. That's easy. I can explain both of these sets of rules to you in 5 minutes. But learning to play well, you might spend 7 years and still not be very good. So learning to live is actually what you need to do as a child. You don't need to learn to work as if you were a functionary. You need to learn to play. You need to do lots of role plays. You need to see lots of examples of all ages and genders around you. You need to be in the middle of social life. Okay, I think this now brings us to the first break. And so we're sort of warmed up, and after the break, it's going to be really going into the depths of culture. Okay, see you in 15 minutes.